Welcome back, Leo Lions. This is Mrs. Morgan with today's lesson over angles and angle relationships. I just realized when I made these notes that this is the wrong lesson, so this should be 8-4 in your textbook. Angle relationships. So 4 different types of angles we're going to talk about: adjacent, vertical, supplementary, and complementary. So adjacent angles. Adjacent simply means side-by-side angles. So angles that are right next to each other and we're going to say they share we call it a ray, it's a side. So angles that are right next to each other and share a side. So for example, there's a lot of examples in the picture above of adjacent angles. So angles that are right next to each other. So I'm going to keep it with my consistent color here, purple. So angle 7, let's say right next to it would be angle 8. So there is an example of adjacent angles right next to each other. And how we write that is angle 7 and angle 8. Now, like I said, there were a lot of examples. Let's say maybe we looked the other way. 7 and 5 are adjacent. Now, we cannot say 5 and 8 are adjacent because they do not share a common side. A common side would be like to 5, this side here. Or this side here that make up that angle. So they have to share one of those two sides. So that's why 8 does not work. We could say 5 and 6 are adjacent angles. So there's a lot of different examples in here, but make sure if you struggle with what is the adjacent angle to that, then think of the sides that make up that angle, and then an angle that shares that side, so 8 for example, would be adjacent. Okay, describe and name 2 vertical angles. So I'm going to switch colors. I'm going to try and keep it consistent. Vertical angles are angles that are opposite of each other. So they're directly across from each other when 2 lines intersect. Angles that are opposite of each other when 2 lines intersect. So for example, take 2 lines and draw them, intersect them. So here's one line, here's a second. And what happens is you create 4 angles with 2 intersecting lines. So the angle, let's say this one, is congruent to the one directly across from it opposite. Those are vertical angles. All right, now the other pair across from each other, those are vertical as well, those 2. Now those little symbols, when there's one little curved symbol, that means that those 2 are congruent, and then there's 2 little curved symbols, well then those 2 are congruent as well. So angles that are opposite of each other when 2 lines intersect, and we're also going to say they are congruent, which means equivalent, the exact same, congruent angles. So that's the nice thing about vertical angles, because once you know one angle measurement, the angle directly across from it is the exact same angle. So for example, I'm going to go up here to 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to change my color to my green. So if we're looking at, let's say, angle 1, directly across from it is angle 4. So those 2 are congruent. They're the exact same angle measurement, and they are what we call vertical angles. So angle 1 and angle 4 are vertical. All right, supplementary. So supplementary are angles that add to 180. And we always label angle measurements with degrees. So angles that add to 180 degrees, I'm going to include here as well. If you don't know that straight lines are 180 degrees. So a lot of the times we can find supplementary angles from straight lines. So if we're looking at a straight line, let's say for instance up here again, I'm going to change my highlight here. So here's a straight line. So two angles that add to that are going to be 180. So take for instance number 3 and I'm going to highlight over here, number 1. Those are what we call supplementary. Again, there's a lot of different examples. 1 and 2 are also supplementary on a different line. 3 and 4 are supplementary. So there's a whole bunch of examples. But what we're looking for are two angles that lie on the exact same line and they add to 180. So my example here that I showed was angle 1 and angle 3. Now, the only difference between complementary and supplementary are what they add to. So supplementary angles that add to 180, while complementary are angles that add to 90 degrees. And again, I'm going to write down because one of the most common examples we look at, 90-degree angle is a right angle. So a right angle, and what you're looking for then is oftentimes the little square in the corner of the angle to show right angles are 90 degrees. Now, in our picture up above, we don't see any of those little squares anywhere, so we don't see any right angles. So there is no example up above. Now, I always got confused when I was in school differentiating between the supplementary and complementary, what they add to. So to help you with that, and I would write this down in your notes, an S can be turned into the number 8. So that's how I remember 180. Then the C in complementary can be turned into a 9 for 90 degrees. So that's how I remember. I've also heard S, there's a C at the top of the S, and there's also a backward C at the bottom of the S, so C always represents 90. So in supplementary, that would be 90 and 90 to get 180. So that's another way to help you remember, but it is important to remember that supplementary is 180, complementary is 90. Make sure you know the difference between those two. All right, so let's look at some examples and identify what these are. Are they adjacent, vertical, complementary, supplementary, and a linear pair means they're on the same line. So this one here, number 1, we have angle A, angle B. They share a common side. Now notice that those two angles combined just represent this angle here. It is not a full straight line, so we can't say that these are supplementary. So the only thing that these are adjacent because they are right next to each other. So those are adjacent angles. Next one, oops, and you know what I just noticed? I was trying to keep it consistent. I thought I did it in green. I didn't. So if you're staying with me on the colors, this one should actually be in purple for adjacent. That's what I did up above. So there we go. They share a side, so those are adjacent. Now, the next one, these are two intersecting lines. They are they are not right next to each other because they don't share a common side. So B's angle is over here, A's angle is over here. They don't share any common side, but they are directly across from each other. So directly across is what we call vertical angles. And we know that those are congruent. So if I told you A was 40 degrees, well then you knew that B was 40 degrees as well. Right? Another one, not a straight line, what those two angles form, so it's not supplementary. We don't see the box for a right angle. It's not complementary. So again, these angles, they share a common side. They are right next to each other, so they are adjacent angles. Next one. So here we do have a straight line. So those two angles added together, we know that they're 180 because we see them on the straight line. They also share this common side. So they are adjacent because they're right next to each other. But they fall into another category because they also add to 180. So supplementary, that straight line. So we know, oops, they fit into two categories, supplementary as well. Now, in that instructions, it did ask for a linear pair. This would be an example of a linear pair because they both form a straight line, those two angles together. All right. Next one, again, notice the two angles together, A and B. It doesn't show a right angle. It kind of looks like it, but I don't see the square there, so I'm not going to assume that it's complementary, that it forms a right angle. They are right next to each other, so this would be adjacent angles. Now, if we did see that little square here, well, then we could say that they're also complementary. But in this case, it's not there, but I'm going to show you in case because you will see examples like that with the little square. And last one, kind of similar to the other example we did in number 4. So they are right next to each other. However, they also form a straight line. So that straight line shows that they are supplementary. They share a side, so they are adjacent. So again, this falls into several categories, very similar to number 4. So they're adjacent, they're right next to each other. They are supplementary because they add to 180, a straight line. And then lastly, like we said in number 4, they do form a straight line, so that's what we call a linear pair. So that's just identifying angles, being able to use our 4 definitions and looking at different types of angles and which category do they fall into. Now this last page, ignore the numbers. I realize they are wrong. We're going to find actual measurements of angles. So when we look at how they're listed here, measurement of angle BCA, that's how we travel in this picture. So let me show you. Actually, I'm going to do all of these in different colors so you know where we're looking at. So measure of B, so we start at B, and then we go to C, so B, C, A. So we are trying to find this measurement here. Now, notice directly across from it on the other side is 50 degrees. Those are what we call vertical angles. Here's a line, here's a line. They're intersecting, so when they're directly across from each other, they're congruent. So we know that angle BCA is the exact same as that 50 degrees. All right, next one, we have measure. I'm going to switch up my colors again. We have measure of angle BAC. So again, we have to go in that order on the picture. So B, then A, then C. So now we are looking at this angle measurement here. Now, the way we could do this is we know that triangles have to add to 180. So we have 2 angle measurements of this triangle. So we have 30 here, we have 50, and then that other angle has to add to 180. So 30 plus 50 is 80. And then what we do is take the triangle 180 and subtract it to see what would be left, so that a missing angle measurement is 100 degrees. And next one, again, gonna switch up my colors. We have angle BCD, and these are gonna start overlapping, BCD. So angle over there. Now notice here, what is going on? We have this angle measurement right next to it, 50. This is a straight line that 50 and angle C lie on. So we know that C and 50 have to add to 180. Straight line is 180. So we would want to take the measurement of the line, subtract what we know, the 50. So we know that angle measurement we're solving for is 130 degrees. All right, straight lines are always 180. So the only way C would work out is if we add those two angles together to get 180. And last one, angle BAE. So let's go over here, and again, these are going to overlap, so I'm trying to stay on one side of it. BAE. So again, look what's happening here. We have a straight line. We have a straight line here. So we know this angle measurement is 100, so we know that A has to be the other measurement to get that whole thing to 180. So 100 plus what gives us 180? Well, that would be 80 degrees. And what we could do is take that straight line, subtract what we know, and that's how we got 80 degrees for angle BAE. So there's then how we find missing angle measurements from a picture.